Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be with you on this Wednesday afternoon, or maybe Wednesday evening where you are, or maybe even Thursday morning. I have the right day, right, Darren? You're looking at me like I'm saying the wrong day. Okay, you panicked me a little bit, like I was saying the wrong day, which is not uncommon. I have said the wrong day plenty of times, so it's a perfectly reasonable possibility that Darren was staring at me because I was saying the wrong day. But boy, do we have a good Wednesday for you. A really good Wednesday. Second hour, Scott Wieman will be here. It's always great when Scott's here. We get so many comments because it's very different from what we usually do. Scott, of course, the founder of Catholic in Recovery, and we'll talk about Catholics, the church, the sacraments, and all of that in relation to recovery from obsession and addiction and all of those things. Your call is very, very welcome. Maybe there's someone in the family that needs help. Maybe you yourself want to talk about your situation with Scott. That's all welcome. Second hour. First hour, we're going to do the church in the news with the man who knows the Catholic Church in the news. Your call is very welcome. If there's a news story that you want to talk about, if there's something that you'd like us to get to, something that you'd like the lowdown on, just call 888-318-7884. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest, the author of very many books. I will not try to go into all of those, but known now as Vice President and Editorial Director for EWTN News. He's also a senior fellow over at the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. Dr. Bunson, thank you very much for being here with us.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. It's been a little while, but I'm always delighted. I love being on Catholic Answers.
That's you're so nice to say that, because I know you're a very busy and important person, and I don't want to bother you, but you were so nice to me last time I saw you saying, no, it doesn't bother me at all. I love being on. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, I think we were in Phoenix, right?
Yeah, for the radio conference there in Phoenix.
Exactly.
Which I judge conferences by the food, and that was a great conference. That's how I go.
Well, as barometers go, I'm a
100% food barometer, and they had great meatballs at that conference.
Okay.
If you want to talk about the church in the news, what's happening with the Catholic Church, how the Catholic Church is being reported on, but also about how what's actually happening. You want the inside scoop. Well, you can't do better than the Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Just give a call, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Dr. Bunson, before I get into the news, I want to ask you about the news business, in that it seems to me that EWTN has made a significant investment in news programming, in really high quality reporting. That's something that you can see on the air. You can feel it when you're reading the National Catholic Register and the like. Tell me about that investment. Are you happy with what you've done and what you've got?
Oh, I think so, yes. The commitment really begins with Mother Angelica, that she recognized that EWTN, that we needed to have coverage of Catholic news. And so this dates way back. But we've really seen, I think, over the last 7-8 years, acquisitions and then real investment, not just in the United States in terms of domestic news with the Catholic News Agency, with the National Catholic Register, and then the news program that we run out of D.C., but also internationally with what we call the ASI Group. So that includes now ASI-MENA, which is our news agency in Arabic, based out of Erbil, Iraq. We have ACI Africa out of Nairobi, with a lot more to come in the coming years. So really, the investment part is in building our infrastructure, building our agencies domestically and internationally, but then also bringing in just the right people to help us foster growth for the coming years. We recently had the appointment of Monse Alvarado, formerly of the Beckett Fund, who's our new president and COO. So there's a very strong commitment on the part of EWTN for news, and we really need to have it today, given what we're looking at in terms of the overall media landscape.
Again, 888-318-7884, the number. Well, it shows. The investment is obvious. It definitely shows. I wonder how much you all think in terms of. I mean, there's Catholic news and there's reporting on Catholic news, but there's also the fact that I can get you on cable television and I can get a bunch of other cable news. And the cable news is not what it used to be. Like this is my question is, like, how much do you think of, well, we're just doing Catholic news, and how much do you think of we're doing news that fills in for the disaster that secular news has become?
Well, it's an and. I mean, we're Catholics, so naturally we like to be and. Realistically, within the Catholic space, the Catholic news space, we are on multi-platforms. As you just noted, there's a heavy investment in our growth. But one of the things that we're finding, especially on our digital platforms and our streaming services, is that there is an intense interest in how we're covering secular news. You'll note, for example, like ENN, EWTN News Nightly, we have a Capitol Hill correspondent. We have a White House correspondent, Owen Jensen. And on Capitol Hill, we have Eric Rosales. We have a Vatican bureau that also covers the Vatican, but also some of the important news that's coming out of Rome. And then with our different news agencies, we're actually breaking a lot of stories that are happening internationally that aren't necessarily directly related to the church, but impact Catholics. But as I was saying, what we're finding is that a lot of people are finding their way to us for our coverage. I think, for example, of the interview that one of our correspondents, Colin Flynn, who's based in Rome, recently did with the baseball player who was protesting the Dodgers. That was seen by over 1 million people just on one of our platforms on YouTube, and was picked up by Fox News and distributed far and wide. So the press conferences, for example, the daily press briefings at the White House are frequently picked up by secular agencies, partly because Owen Jensen is one of the few reporters out there who's actually asking questions I think that Catholics are interested in, but people of good conscience are also interested in.
That's the thing is, I feel like you all are, and those are two great examples. But like when I listen to your White House reporting, I think most reporters are reporting out of and into a certain narrative. And your reporting is, I know that many of the reporters there think, well, that's from left field, but it's not from left field for, 50 or 60 million people. That's the question they think someone should be asking, but no secular reporter is asking it.
Well, exactly. Well, on the one hand, you have a lot of reporters who are sort of establishment legacy media, who represent outlets that, will be perfectly blunt, have a really strong bias in one direction or the other. And then there are some smaller ones, international ones, that really struggle to get themselves established. From our standpoint, we are blessed to have a seat in the briefing room. We have really carved out for ourselves a significant presence at the White House and on Capitol Hill, and we have two reporters who are now known quantities in both of those institutions. Eric Rosales, for example, is on a first-name basis with many, many people in Congress as part of just that beat. And you really have to have that. And so we've broken stories, for example, about some aspects of the GOP's investigation into the Biden administration. There are some who would say, well, you're nothing but mouthpieces for the Republicans. But what I can tell you is we also get a lot of emails from people who say you're nothing but mouthpieces for the Democrats.
Sure. So
I always take those emails as a sign that we're doing something effective, but we're also being professional journalists. And I think that's one of the hallmarks that we've really been making great strides in over the last decade, in that we are Catholic journalists, but that means that we're also very professional, and we recruit the best reporters that we can find who really can report and I think build out what we need to do on the Catholic news side.
The number again, 888-318-7884. We have the Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News with us, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Your questions are welcome on any aspect of the news, about how the news is covered, if you want to get into that kind of stuff, but also about what's happening in the news. 888-318-7884. You want to know about where we are on that Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence story, or the Synod on Synodality, or the other synod, the German one, or Pope Francis's health.
Interesting news on that front too. I know we'll be getting to in this hour.
All right, we'll call and ask. We got to take a quick break. We'll come right back with your calls for Dr. Matthew Bunson right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
One time somebody said to me, "Why don't you air these people?" And I said, "No, because I don't think they're Catholic." He says, "By what right do you have to say that?" I said, "I own the network."
Mother Angelica Live Classics. Every morning, 2 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I am a very strong believer in Catholic news. I do think Catholics have something very, very important to contribute there, especially because there's something in being a Catholic in a society that where your views are the minority, where you're just less likely to get reporters who are just swimming with the school, and more likely to get some that are on their own path and willing to ask the question that's outside the narrative. So if you've got questions about the news, we've got Dr. Matthew Bunson here to answer them, 888-318-7884. I will ask my own news question, and then I will let callers determine the direction of the show after that. And it's just about the health of Pope Francis.
Yeah.
And we've seen the previous two popes. We've seen one who just stuck it out to the bitter end, and he had his reasons for doing that. And long after people could see that he was significantly disabled. And then we had another who said, I'm going to resign for the good of the office. So now what's the standard for popes, and what do you think Pope Francis will do? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think the best answer to that is we don't know. It's Pope Francis has been, for, as we all know, a pope of surprises, and he does the unexpected. He has talked in the past about the question of potential resignation. We know this because he's discussed it on a number of in-flight press conferences in which he joked at one point, and this is almost 7-8 years ago, that he said that, well, I might have 5 years left. The reality is that that's entirely up to God as to how long his pontificate is going to be. But he has talked that the idea of a resignation now is very much present, and this is going to be the case for, I think, any pontificate going forward. We know that Pope Francis, as popes have before him, wrote a letter essentially considering himself resigned should there be some sort of a medical crisis in which he is fully debilitated or completely incapacitated. He said publicly not too long ago that he presented that letter to the then Cardinal Secretary of State, Tarcisio Bertone, who was subsequently succeeded by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, that he wrote that right after his election and gave it to him. But then in sort of classic Francis fashion, he has that sense of humor. He said, "I'm not entirely sure whatever happened to that letter." So Francis recognizes that there are infirmities. His health has been a matter of some public discourse for a while. All of us have covered it. And I think Francis, my sense is, and this is just my opinion as an observer who goes over there quite a bit and talks to a lot of people, is that the Holy Father, I think, is committed to sticking this out. I don't think at this point that he has any plans for a resignation, barring a really sudden turn in his health or something entirely unexpected. Yeah. Now, you asked the question about his overall health. I think we have seen over the last few years, from 2021 going forward, that he's had a number of health problems. He had the mobility issues caused by his knee. And I would say a little more serious was the surgery that he had on his colon in 2021. And now this most recent stay in the hospital where he had additional surgery in the colon and the stomach. So clearly he's somebody who's got health issues, but he, to his great credit, bounces back with remarkable zeal and a lot of energy from these episodes. I think that the line that really says it best is that when he left the hospital and he was asked, "How are you doing?" His main response is "Ancora vivo," I'm still alive.
I was talking to my dad. He told me about that. I think he saw it on EWTN News that he said that. Yeah, which is a funny thing to say. I mean, we could see that, Holy Father, but I guess
Yes.
that's the extent of what you're getting from me.
Right.
I don't think that as far as resignation goes, I cannot imagine that he would have any interest in resigning while he has a synod going on. That seems like
Exactly.
what pope would start a synod and not finish it if he could.
Correct. Now, that's something of an undertaking because we're in the midst of a synod that is actually a multi-year process.
Right.
And we'll talk probably a bit more about that later. But Francis seems committed not just to the synod, as important as that is to him, but also to continuing his travels. We know that he has a trip to Lisbon coming up in the first week of August. I'll happily be there as part of the World Youth Day coverage. And then just a few weeks after that, he's flying, of all places, to Mongolia to visit there, which is a very small community of Catholics, but I think it's part of his wider geopolitical strategy in kind of circling China. If you just put pins
That's
on a
an
map,
interesting point.
you will see that he has made it a real intent, a strategy to visit places surrounding China. So this trip to Mongolia, I think, has greater importance than one thinks. And then next year, he hopes to travel to Argentina.
Oh yeah. So right. So, but I have to admit, the reason I asked is because I love inside baseball stuff. I want to know: do you at EWTN Nightly News have a list of papable cardinals where you go? Because if the Pope starts getting sick, you know that's going to be the first thing people are going to want to know, if anything. So, do you have a list or no?
Well, I think that the best way to answer that is that you have to plan in news for every possible contingency, and you have to be prepared for what is the inevitable. That's just good journalism. One of the challenges in trying to put together a list of the so-called papabili that you're referring to is that in this pontificate, we have seen names rise and fall.
Oh, that's true.
And I won't necessarily get into specific names, but we have seen some cardinals who seem to be very much in favor. They had almost meteoric rises, and then suddenly they're not anymore. That's a product in part of Francis's style of government, but also there's an X factor with this particular pope that I think has to be examined before we can even begin talking about who might be papabili, and that is the nature of Pope Francis's appointments. True to his word, from the very beginning of his pontificate, he talked about listening and hearing from the periferia, the peripheries.
Right.
And his choices for the College of Cardinals have very much been reflective of that perspective. So we have cardinals from places that are admittedly geographically far flung.
Like San Diego.
San Diego. That's another whole conversation. But so places like Tonga and Mongolia, Cardinal Giorgio Marengo, who was named last August, is 48 years old. A brilliant Italian missionary, but now he's a cardinal. We also have someone like Cardinal Anders Arborelius from all places of Sweden, or Cardinal Meng Bo from Myanmar. Now, that's a very wide-ranging group of cardinals.
Right.
And they do not get to roam very often as a body, and so they don't really know each other. So taking all of that together, it's very difficult to try to handicap who would be considered papabili at any given moment.
It's just a different world we're in now because the
Yes.
Pope's been
Yes,
true
it
to his
is.
word about going out to the peripheries.
That's right.
All right. Well, we'll trust the Holy Spirit with that one, but I'm going to go to the phones and let
It's a good
people
place
ask you
to be.
questions. Don's in New Jersey listening on Domestic Church Media. Don, thank you very much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Matthew Bunson.
Hey, Cy, Dr. Bunson. I have a question about, I know the Pope talks a lot, but he doesn't seem to take much action, and I'm wondering what he's going to do with the same-sex marriages in Germany. Many of the bishops are approving of that. Is there going to be a schism, or I don't know?
Yeah. Well, this is, I think you raise a very important question that we need to continue to pay attention to, because this has been a multi-year process with the Germans. We have a small group of German Catholics, the Central Committee of Catholics there, with the admittedly full cooperation of what seems at least to be a majority of German bishops. And they had this multi-year synodal path that at the end of the day, as everyone was concerned would happen, did happen. And that is that they issued a series of statements and desires for changes in the governance of the church, of the blessing of same-sex unions, of the ordination of women, and unraveling of almost the whole of the church's teachings on human sexuality, in particular homosexuality. Francis has said a couple of things that I think are very important for us to remember. The first is that back in 2019, when the Germans were first starting, he sent a letter to the Germans asking them not to do this, not to take this path. As he put it, and this is crucial, he said that take my synodal path, take the path of synodality that I've laid out for the church, don't take your own. The Germans didn't listen, they plowed ahead. Francis, on a number of occasions, has criticized this German process. Most recently, a couple of months ago, he described it as ideological and unhelpful and elitist. And
wow.
Those who follow Francis, anytime he uses the phrase like ideological, it means that you're definitely on the outs with him. Because the one thing that he does not like, he has said this on many occasions, are ideological bishops. He thinks the church cannot and should not be ideological, and that's something that goes all the way back to his days in Argentina when he was Archbishop in Buenos Aires. The other thing that has happened is that the Germans themselves, despite plowing ahead with what they wanted, have now reached something of their own crisis point with their own synodal path. Yes, they issued all of these documents, and they had this grand plan to establish a permanent central committee. I'll let anyone figure out what a central committee would look like. It sounds very Politburo, but it's in keeping with sort of the overall approach that they have. They wanted a permanent central committee, again, despite the clear statements from the Vatican that this should have no canonical authority, no doctrinal authority. But in order to make that work, it has to be funded. And that has to be then funded by the German church. And it requires basically the unanimous consent of all the bishops. And 4 bishops, at least so far, have said very publicly they will not agree to this because it is anti-church. And so now you are looking at the essentially defunding of this German synodal path. Some would say that the Germans have nevertheless achieved one of the key goals that they had, which was to get this synodal path finished and its documents out there with the obvious intent of trying to influence as best they can the Synod on Synodality in October in Rome.
Don, thank you very, very much for that question. I wonder, no one has, I haven't seen reporting on what lay Catholics in Germany feel about this. Do you know, is this the whole church, or is this just bishops that are on this path?
Well, yeah, Jonathan Liedl, a senior editor for the National Catholic Register, was there for a number of weeks covering the last segments and sections of this German Synodal Way. And he was traveling around Germany and going to Mass and other things and talking with German Catholics. Clearly, the Germans have a problem of Catholics who are leaving the church. Now, it's more complicated than would happen in the United States, for example, where you just say, I'm done with you, I'm leaving. In Germany, there is a state tax, the Kirchentax. And what that means is that part of your income actually goes to supporting the church in Germany based on what's called a Concordat, an agreement between the church and the government. So in order to leave the church, you basically have to publicly and formally disavow your membership in the church in order to extricate yourself from having to pay the tax. We have seen in recent decades the German Catholic population plummeting. At the same time, we have seen collapses in vocations and everything else, even though the German church is flush with money. We know that the German church, for example, or the church in Germany, helped to fund much of the Amazonian Synod. So we still have that as a reality in Germany. But the problem is that the numbers are declining so rapidly. And they're happening, I think, from 2 directions. We have this small group of German Catholics, lay people, who have been agitating for a long time. And it's funny how problems with the heresy seem to just always come out of Germany. historically. I mean, we had we had Martin Luther, and now we have the Central Committee of German Catholics. But so this small group has been agitating for a long time, as I said. But then we also have a number of German Catholics who are just so disaffected and so unhappy with the direction of much of what they see in the German church that they're fairly apathetic. So it's a crisis really in two directions. Having said that, there are a number of important movements taking place in Germany, and a lot of faithful, strong, dedicated Catholics that are out there fighting the good fight to save the church there.
Oh, that last point is a great one to hear. We got to take a quick break. Lots more folks on the phones. A couple lines open, 888-318-7884. Are you ready to defend your faith in a world of unbelief? Join us at the 9th Annual Catholic Answers Apologetics Conference. This year's theme, I Believe in God. And it'll help you provide clear and charitable answers to atheism, agnosticism, and plain old indifference. Don't miss what promises to be the event of the season. Join us in San Diego from September 21st through 24th as we welcome our special guest, Dr. Scott Hahn, and an all-star lineup of great Catholic speakers. Spend quality time with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and enjoy 4 days of fun, fellowship, and adoration of the Almighty. Seats are still available, but they're going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 888-291-8000 to register. Enter promo code EARLY and save $50. That's CatholicAnswersConference.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Anna Mitchell here. Tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll talk about the life and witness of St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher and kick off Religious Freedom Week on their feast day. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. What a great opportunity to get to talk about the news of the world from a Catholic perspective. The Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News is Dr. Matthew Bunson. He is our guest this hour. Your calls are very welcome. 888-318-7884. I think we've adequately covered the German side of things. We'll go more calls if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to South Dakota. Jim's in South Dakota listening on Real Presence Radio. Jim, awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Bunson.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. So, just wondering if the guest could comment on criticism of the Pope by Dr. Regis Martin, Cardinal Burke, Archbishop Vigano, Cardinal Snyder, Father Altman, and Father Copenhagen, which is an Orthodox priest in Rochester, New York, commenting on how the Pope was promoting the vaccine. Any comment on that?
Yeah, well, I think this pontificate being somewhat unprecedented, being fairly unique in Pope Francis's approach, I think has certainly provoked strong sentiments in a lot of different directions. I know that there have been some, especially in the United States, who have expressed concerns, for example, over Traditionis Custodes and the traditional Latin Mass. We have, for the record, for those who may not be familiar, Archbishop Vigano back in 2018 issued a very famous statement criticizing Pope Francis and going so far, and I think history has proven very inappropriately, demanding his resignation, in particular for his handling of the McCarrick case. In this media environment today, criticism like that is going to happen. We saw criticism of Pope Benedict XVI that we all tend to forget about back in the day. And even I'm old enough to remember the criticisms that were voiced in a different world, a different era, about Pope John Paul II and some of his teachings and some of his positions. Criticisms of popes, unfortunately, throughout history are not unheard of, but we also have to be very careful here in recognizing and acknowledging that Pope Francis is the Holy Father and that he is the Vicar of Christ and therefore is due all respect in that office and for that office.
Jim, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. I'm just going to keep moving and get everybody on here if I can. The number is 888-318-7884. We're talking about the news from a Catholic perspective. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest. Again, 888-31-TRUTH, the number. Going to Michigan now, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. Pam, we're awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Bunson.
Great. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I've recently seen videos of members of the World Economic Forum talking about how they're going to use artificial intelligence to interpret the Bible. I think they even used the term rewrite the Bible because nobody's interpreted it properly. And I'm just curious what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, well, I think there are two aspects to that that are immediately striking to me. The first is the development of AI, which some of us have been following for a number of years. As a film buff, I go all the way back to, I think, the mid-1960s with a movie called Colossus, the Forbin Project, that was one of those apocalyptic science fiction films that predicted the emergence of an AI that takes over the world. So we've been pondering this for a long time, and any fans of like the science fiction series Dune would be aware of the presence also in the ancient history of AI. So in the fevered dreams of science fiction writers, we've seen all of this before. So the emergence of AI technology, I think it's almost seemingly out of the blue in the last year or so. ChatGPT and other things has opened, I think, important conversations, both within the church and outside the church. Even Elon Musk over at Twitter has expressed his concerns there. And this is something that the church is very aware of. How do we use this technology? How do we use it ethically? Now, in terms of Scripture and rewriting of Scripture, I think that's a perfect example of why we need to exercise prudence and we need to have the certain wisdom of the church in assessing these new forms of technology. The idea of an AI rewriting Scripture, and now are we talking, for example, about a new effort at translating it? Are we suggesting that we leave it to an AI to write or draft new books for Scripture? I'm sure that those are likely going to happen simply because those are the types of things that are possible now. But then as Catholics and certainly as a church, we need to look at those and help people to understand that this is not revealed truth, that this is not actual canonical Scripture. But in the environment that we exist in today, with the prevalence of technology, also, unfortunately, with the overall levels of a lack of information, I'm trying to avoid the word ignorance, on the part of many, especially in the secular media, about what we believe as Catholics in terms of Scripture. I think our job is going to be very important in the coming years to help people discern properly.
I didn't know about this story, so I'm glad Pam asked it. It strikes me that why would you? It seems to me a very obvious move of we won't listen to a voice that's higher than us, so we'll go to a machine voice of something that's lower than us. Why would that be considered a clever, innovative thing to do? Like, why not listen to the word of God that comes from God?
Well, in part because that's out of fashion as far as a lot of people are concerned. It's also an innovation, and sort of one of the little truths behind a lot of this AI technology is that there's an old, I'm dating myself here, a GIGO, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
That as you are designing a program or you're plugging in information, what you put in will determine significantly what you're going to get out at the end. So if you have an AI that has been programmed, for example, to try to mimic scripture, but then you inform it or you build it with a narrative that represents ardent, contemporary, modern, progressive thought, you will end up with a piece of proposed scripture that I think you and I could probably sit down and write ourselves if we wanted to go in a really horrifying direction.
Right. What do you think, Pam? All makes sense?
Yeah, that does. And I'm just a little worried because, like you said, I think a lot of people are going to embrace it when they shouldn't. It's definitely not the truth, and it's a little alarming, in my opinion.
It seems like what a terribly insecure species we are if we need a machine to tell us what to think. I mean, it's fine. It's fine if the machine does what it does. I'm not offended by the machine doing it, but I don't need it to tell me what to think.
Right. Well, and it goes hand in hand with what we're seeing is what Pope Francis refers to as the throwaway culture, that everyone is replaceable. And we try to find new technologies to make them even more replaceable without really giving a whole lot of thought as to the ramifications for us long term.
We have more callers, and I do want to get to the other callers. Pam, thank you very much. But I'm somewhat concerned. I don't want the big story of our time, of this current era, to go unremarked on. I want to ask you about it. So we talked about the German synodal way, but the synod and synodality. Can you give us the news there, what's happening, and what should we be attending to?
Right. Well, the timing for our conversation is nigh unto providential, because yesterday, the Holy See, that the General Secretariat of the Synod issued what's called an Instrumentum Laboris. I know these are always technical terms that they use. Essentially, it's the blueprint for the upcoming Synod on Synodality in October, which is the first of two synods that will be held, the next one in October of 2024. And what it is sort of the laying out how the synod itself in October can be held. It's really broken into two parts. I'm going to get too technical. The first part of this is a reflection on synodality itself, because that's a term that I'm sure you get a lot of calls of people trying to understand what exactly synodality is.
Right.
The next section of that is a series of reflection questions, of discernment questions. And it looks at a variety of questions that are being posed to the participants of the Synod in October, based on, it's sort of distilled from all of the different conversations and meetings and other things that have been held throughout the last 2 years. So we've had the parish, we've had the diocesan, we've had the national, we've had the continental phases, with all of these listening sessions for Catholics. Now, how many Catholics actually participated is one of those open-ended questions. We see numbers that perhaps as low as 1% of all Catholics have actually been engaged actively in these listening sessions and all of the listening and discernment heading into this. But the questions themselves contain a number of hot-button issues, as one might expect. They're not proposals, that has to be stressed, nor is an Instrumentum Laboris a document of any magisterial weight. That has to be stressed, and that's something that the Synod organizers themselves have said. But it's a series of reflection questions. Among them is it possible, for example, to have women deacons? Is that something that could be envisaged? It asks as a question. Is it possible, it asks, in certain regions for married men to become priests? An end to priestly celibacy. It asks a question, how can we be more welcoming and open to what they quote the LGBTQ plus community? But the biggest focus in this instrumentum is on authority in the life of the church. And I think that's where a lot of people have focused their attention, in part because it takes up so much of the instrumentum, but also the ramifications are pretty significant.
So then what comes next? Now that we've got this, what comes next?
Well, the preparations will continue for the synod itself, which starts on the 4th of October and will go to the 29th of October. The next big step is, and one that we're all paying very careful attention to, is who's actually going to be participating. In other words, now we have a series of discernment questions. We need to know who's actually going to be doing the discerning and the discussing in the actual synod. And it's a crucial question because each Episcopal Conference is sending some, each country is sending some. This one's different in a number of ways. About 79% of the participants are going to be bishops or cardinals. That leaves 21% who aren't, and that's the largest number ever. And a notable big difference is that they actually will have the ability to vote on the final document that is presented to Pope Francis as the jumping off point for preparations for next year's synod in October 2024. In that group will be men and women religious, as well as a body of lay people, many of whom are going to be appointed by Pope Francis based on the recommendations that are given to him. So as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of attention paid to that list of who exactly among the lay people will be representing us because of the crucial discussions that are apparently being teed up.
Oh boy, that's the church. I mean, we already seem like we're in a very divided and bad mood with one another. That scares me. That list. And then there will be all the Twitter armies commenting on all the choices for that list, and well, it's going to be an interesting time. We got to take a quick break. I want those on the line. I'm going to get to you right when we come back. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more with Dr. Matthew Bunson on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Back to Catholic Answers Live. Hey, next hour, Scott Wienan's going to be here. And you know we love it when Scott's here. He's the founder of Catholic in Recovery. There's Catholic in Recovery groups popping up all around the world. Certainly it started here in the United States, and lots of them are English language, but in other languages starting around the world. If you've got questions about addiction, recovery, about dealing with obsessions or compulsions, and the role that the healing of the sacraments plays in that, the role that Catholic community plays in that, Scott's the perfect guy. So hang out for a second hour and we'll do that. This hour, we're just delighted to have Dr. Matthew Bunson here with us, who we have not had on in a long time, which is a complete failure on our part, but we're glad that that's one that we're remedying today, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. I promised I would go back to the callers, so that's what I'm going to do. We'll get some callers on here, and if they don't get to all the stuff I want to get to, I got some more questions for you at the end. Up next is Walt in Westchester, Pennsylvania, listening on the EWTN app. Walt, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Bunson.
So, Dr. Bunson, it seems to me there's a lack of interest in trying to get to the bottom of how Theodore McCarrick was able to rise so high in the church amongst the bishops and, frankly, even the news outlets like EWTN. So how are we going to why isn't there a fire being put under people to find out? Because it's quite scandalous that this man was able to rise so high, use so many people, and there are people that know about this, and they're still bishops, and everybody's kind of hiding and protecting them.
Dr.
What's
Bunson?
going on with that?
Yeah, I think that's a question I actually hear quite a bit. And we have to go back a little bit in time to 2018 when this whole scandal exploded as it did. We had the decision, the important decision, I think, by the Archdiocese of New York in conjunction with other dioceses and archdioceses to go forward with this investigation into McCarrick's history. The result, of course, was right at the same time that we had the Pennsylvania grand jury report. It was a perfect storm of disaster for the Church in the United States that had been dealing with this clergy sexual abuse crisis for almost 2 decades. I know from a personal standpoint, I've been covering it now for 22 years. It seemed as though, in the light of this McCarrick story and then the Pennsylvania grand jury report, that nothing had ever been done about the clergy sexual abuse crisis, that no progress had been made at all. And so the narrative itself was shifted very dramatically. In terms of McCarrick himself, what we did see was an investigation and then the McCarrick report that was issued. I don't know if you've read the report. If you haven't, I would really strongly encourage you to do so. But you and all of your listeners, Si, I think, should be aware that it makes very difficult reading. The history that they track there of his emergence and how he managed to get himself appointed and then promoted again, it makes for really diabolical reading, but also really sad and frustrating reading. So from that standpoint, I think we have this McCarrick report that's out there. Meanwhile, the Holy See and the Church has done everything it can in the sense that he has been dismissed from the clerical state. He has been dismissed as a member of the College of Cardinals. The most extreme penalties that the Church can exercise have been in this case. Now, there's still a number of outstanding civil actions that are out there. So those have to play out as well, but we'll have to see because of the clearly deteriorated state of his health may make those trials moot. But I think we do have a pretty good snapshot into how he rose, and it's in that report. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at that.
Well, thanks very much for the question. I think the main thing people want to know is, could it happen now? Like, has it been remedied, or could a personality like this weasel his way to the top of the church again?
Yeah, well, we hope that this will never happen again. Church history, I go all the way back to a doctor of the church, St. Peter Damian, in his important book called the Book of Gomorrah, the Liber Gomorrhianus, detailed many of the same problems that we're dealing with today in terms of the clergy being corrupt and immoral. So we are dealing, of course, with the fallen humanity and the temptations of power and influence. So no one can say that something like this will never happen again. I would say, however, that institutionally we're in a much better shape than we were 20 years ago. Setting aside the success that we've had, demonstrable success we've had with the Dallas Charter and the Essential Norms, one of the most important developments, I think, in the last 10 years has been Vos Estis Lux Mundi, which is a decree by Pope Francis that makes it possible for a diocesan bishop to be investigated for not just for abuse, but for also failures in actually pursuing it, in possible cover-ups, in negligence, and in the abuse of vulnerable adults, which is where many of the areas where the accusations against McCarrick fell. So I think we are in better shape in that regard. And now we have to have very aggressive vigilance when it comes to that.
Walt, again, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Gil in Long Island, New York, listening on the machine that I don't say the name of, Alexa. And Gil, if you could kind of be quick with your question, we'll get you an answer. We're just getting near the end.
Yes. I was wondering if he could comment on Donald Trump and the documents and all of that stuff, and I just hope that he will run for president in 2024. And the Catholic news is the best news. Jesus said, "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." So I love the Catholic news.
Thank you. Thanks, Gil. So you got the
Thanks very
question
much.
about the whole Trump and the documents thing.
Yeah, I think from the standpoint of Catholic journalism, we had been reporting on this for some time. We've been covering Donald Trump from the very beginning with our presidential coverage and then our coverage of the White House. And obviously, we are gearing up for the 2024 campaign. I would be very surprised. The president has already announced that he intends to run. And it would be difficult to imagine any circumstances, even conviction, that would keep him from continuing to pursue the presidency. And we'll be there to cover it. In terms of a Catholic perspective on this, obviously we need to make certain that the virtue of justice is fulfilled. But at the same time, we also have to be very cognizant of what is right justice and is justice actually being pursued.
Gil, thank you very much. How do you distinguish at the network between the opinion side, where I know some people, their view on Donald Trump and whatnot, and the news side, where I would really like to not know the reporter's view on Donald Trump, or you know what I mean? I want them to report.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we really strive to do. I think if you look at our reporting throughout the 4 years of the Trump administration, we readily acknowledged his successes on the pro-life side, but there were other areas, and this is true with any administration, that placed him directly in opposition to some of the teachings of the church, for example, on things like the death penalty. Now, we look at the substantive differences from church teaching of abortion, which is an intrinsic evil, and something like the death penalty, which remains a prudential judgment. But those also have to factor into our coverage. But in terms of our political coverage, we strive very hard. We are neither Republicans nor Democrats. We are Catholics. And we are Catholic journalists with all that means, and that includes best practices, that means ethics, and being as fair as we can in our coverage.
I do want to move to something that's more positive than some of the things we've had to discuss, because that's the news business is not the news of just reporting about the roses came up.
Yes.
But we have some ways of communicating with our listeners. We sometimes poll them, we ask them questions, and currently the only thing on the entire docket of personalities and events of the church that we get above 90% are enthusiastic and positive about is the Catholic effort to revive a love for and knowledge of the Eucharist.
Yes. This has been one of the great developments, I think, in the last year. And we have seen this great push by the bishops to a national Eucharistic revival that will, of course, culminate in next summer with the Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis. And we have been covering it. We are, as a network, going to be very actively involved in the coverage of the Congress and really doing everything we can to promote it. Our polling for EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion Research found consistently that less than 50% of Catholics believe in the real presence of the Eucharist, which is a tragedy, and even fewer obviously go to confession on a regular basis. So we have obvious polling and a lot of statistical information out there that this is a crisis for the church. And so the initiative on the part of the bishops, I think, is a very significant one. It's the first Eucharistic Congress that will be held, I think, since 1976 in Philadelphia, that was attended, as an interesting side note, by a cardinal by the name of Karol Wojtyła, who 2 years later was elected Pope John Paul II. But we can go all the way back to, I think, to 1926 and a Eucharistic Congress in Chicago in which over 1 million people attended.
Wow.
And I've referred to it in lectures and things as a coming out party for American Catholicism. No one anticipated that this could possibly happen, and it did. So I think there is very much great interest in this revival. And I think they have managed to capture the imagination of a lot of Catholics with these Eucharistic processions that are being planned from 4 different directions across the United States, all coming to meet in Indianapolis. And I think that's going to be an exciting moment for American Catholicism.
I do too, and I cannot wait to participate in it. And I'm not a participator, and I cannot wait to get out there and walk and to be at these events. And Dr. Matthew Bunson, man, I'm so sorry we haven't had you on recently, because it's much to our detriment. Thank you so much for coming on and doing an hour with us.
It's a privilege to be with you again. I really had a great time. I hope you did too.
I hope everybody will check out EWTN News, see what they're doing over there. It gets better all the time. Check out the National Catholic Register. Wonderful reporting over there.
Amen.
You guys are doing a great job, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Anytime you'd like. God bless.
All right, coming up, we're going to talk about Catholic faith and addiction and recovery from addiction. If you've got questions in that regard, if you've got somebody that you'd like to help, even if that person is you, give us a call, 888-31-TRUTH. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and as promised, Scott Weeman here with us from Catholic in Recovery. He wrote the Sacraments and the 12 Steps, and he's been building up this beautiful apostolate, Catholic in Recovery. And he's actually on the road. Usually we have him here in studio with us, but he's, as part of his work, building up that apostolate, which is an apostolate. I'll let him tell you about it. I was going to describe it, but I'll let him describe it to you. He'll do better than I will. Scott's on the road, so it's nice to have you here, even though we don't quite have you here, Scott.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I miss being in studio with you and rubbing shoulders together. But I think we'll make do. Hopefully the sound is coming in all right. Yeah,
you sound fine. So give us the basic rundown, because I was going to give it a shot, but you may not know this, but you're more qualified than I am to describe your own apostolate. Tell me about Catholics in Recovery. What is it? What does it do? And how's it growing?
Yeah. So Catholic in Recovery is a community. I like to describe it as a community rather than a ministry or an organization, but a community of men and women who are seeking freedom from a variety of addictions, compulsions, and unhealthy attachments, as well as those impacted by the family disease of addiction. That might include alcoholism, drug addiction, compulsive overeating, restricted eating, gambling addiction, pornography and lust addiction, technology addiction, cluttering, you name it. If these things that we attach to or seek in place of God that become not only habit forming, but really manifest physically, socially, emotionally and spiritually. And so we unite 12-step addiction recovery with the sacramental life of the church to create a place where people can find really support. It's really just those who have found recovery, sharing the good news with those who are seeking it, and in turn, both benefit.
If you'd like to talk about that, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. So the key thing I always feel like we need to let people know is you're not trying to replace whatever addiction or recovery program or process someone is in. Maybe it's Alcoholics Anonymous, or maybe it's another group. This is not a replacement for that.
Absolutely, yes. It's not a replacement. Supplemental to, the way that I see Catholic in Recovery is really a bridge between 12-step recovery fellowships or other addiction recovery fellowships and the Catholic Church. We find many people who have found the miraculous healing from God in a recovery fellowship or working some kind of recovery program, oftentimes wanting a deeper relationship with God or someone who they might identify as a higher power. Maybe returning to the faith of their youth, or maybe coming to the Catholic Church for the first time. And also those who are in the pews, those Catholics who are seeking freedom from an addiction, compulsion, or unhealthy attachment that might keep them separated from God or create family challenges or a variety of those things that can really be a huge impediment in our spiritual life. As Pope Francis says, we act like a field hospital, for those who are just living their daily lives. And, there are many things that seek our attention or promise fulfillment: alcohol, drugs, food, you name it. It's really woven with my own story as well. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict who in 2011 found freedom thanks to 12-step recovery groups. And as a result, really made my way back to the church. Over some time, I found that the church could be doing a little bit more to support those, provide a message of hope for those who are impacted by addiction, and began just writing at first, and then over time doing some speaking. Community is formed. We now have about 90 different Catholic and recovery groups around the country that are active in 30 plus different states, 2 in Mexico, 2 in Canada, and we have a variety of virtual meetings, about 30 every week that meet on a regular basis. Some of them are general in nature, some of them are for family members impacted by a loved one's addiction, some are specific to different addiction types such as food, lust, alcohol and drugs, etc.
888-318-7884. If you're encountering this in your family, maybe you yourself are struggling, maybe there's someone that you'd like some advice on how to help in their struggles, 888-318-7884 is the number, 888-31-TRUTH. Scott, when I think about what you do, and it seems to me that the Catholic Church at its best, somebody saw a need and they said, how does the gospel apply to this need? And that's how we ended up with Catholic school systems and hospital systems and all of that. This is a real need that the Catholic community can contribute to. This dealing with addiction. walking with those who are in recovery or who may not be in recovery but need help to get there. This seems to me that I would hope in hundreds of years from now, this would be one of the things that's listed with Catholic hospitals and Catholic schools and all that. The Catholics saw a need and applied the gospel to that need.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it will be long before we see Catholic in Recovery fellowships around the world and really active. There are Protestant organizations. Celebrate Recovery is one of them that is active in 30,000 different churches around the world. In fact, we lose many Catholics to those. They find freedom in their life. They experience miracles around addiction recovery in non-Catholic Christian fellowships, and then oftentimes that leads them to start worshiping in those fellowships. There are also many who participating in 12-step recovery groups or other Christian non-Catholic fellowships who long to unite their sacramental life, their faith, their Catholic devotions with their recovery. And in many of those circumstances, we have to remain rather general in nature as we're describing God. In many secular fellowships, referring to Jesus Christ is often deemed out of bounds. Those fellowships are not unilaterally Christian, but I think that that's changed over some time, and so the need really for Catholic in Recovery or some kind of a Catholic fellowship that centers around addiction recovery is absolutely needed.
888-318-7884, the number, as happens with Scott's here. Already plenty of folks on the line. There are a couple lines open. If you got a question you'd like to ask, any question is welcome. You certainly don't have to be Catholic to call. If there's questions that you'd like Scott's help with, that's what Scott does. He's helpful and very knowledgeable and very grounded, and we would love to take your call. 888-318-7884. We'll start in Nebraska with Elizabeth in Nebraska. Elizabeth, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Scott Wieman.
Yes.
Hi, Elizabeth.
My granddaughter, who is in her late 30s now, has been on drugs off and on since she was 13 years old. In between, she has birthed 5 children, 2 of which are living with her father, and her grandmother is there to help out. But she came to Nebraska from Wichita, Kansas, the night before last, and has they tried to get her into the mission. Is what she said she would do, and try to get some help. And when we put her in the mission, they, of course, got her background check and contacted the cops, and the police picked her up this morning in Kearney.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth. What would you like Scott to help you with?
I'd like to know if he could somehow get to her in jail and talk to her and get her started and tell her where she can go. She's a Catholic.
Scott?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I can hear, Elizabeth, thank you for calling in. It's the weight that you're carrying and the burden which you carry is present throughout your call. And I think this shows truly how addiction does not just happen in a vacuum. First and foremost, the entire family is impacted by addiction, not just the individual who is struggling. I have seen many people find recovery and a new way of life in the worst of places, in the gutter, in prison, in jail, in institutions, in the hospital, that we would call rock bottom. And these moments of rock bottom where there are very few other opportunities or options available other than seeking God's help. I've been there myself. This is where I was, asking God, please take this from me. Of course, it looked so much different than the way that I had hoped for, but God intervened, and I can relate also on a family level. I have many concerned family members and friends who, while I was active in my addiction, leading me down paths that were really, really scary for them. They did all that they could, but they couldn't do much. And so it wasn't until I hit this place of really losing it all, experiencing the natural consequences of my behavior and actions, was I really faced with this life or death situation. And it was either get help or die. Now, that was for me the moment where the fear of doing something different overcame my fear of change. So the pain of what I was going through prompted me to find help and to find change. That doesn't happen when we are just being protected by family members. Sometimes a jail cell can be a great place to find that kind of help. Now, I would strongly encourage yourself, other family members, even while your granddaughter is in jail or is locked up, seek your own help. Find some help. Find a group that might be similar to Al-Anon or a Catholic in Recovery family and friends group, which you can find online, or other resources. Educate yourself on addiction recovery and find others who have been in your shoes. And they will share with you what you can do to support and what might not be so helpful. As far as your daughter is concerned, when I certainly cannot, visit her in the Nebraska jail, but I do think that there is hope for her. And perhaps while she's here in this place of challenge, that she might actually find some help herself. But that's not going to come, overnight. But it might come from someone who's been in exactly her shoes. If she's willing, when she gets out, if she's willing for change, be supportive of that change, but seek some professional help so you know where to direct her, and also non-professional help in the way of other family members who have been in your situation. I think it can be very helpful, because the insanity of addiction, and it sounds like you're dealing with some insanity here, it can't be counteracted just in isolation or by ourselves. We need a community, and we certainly need the help of God. I would first and foremost, though, strongly encourage finding other family members who are impacted by addiction to show you the way.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. That brings us to the break. We have to take that break. I will be right back with Scott Wieman and more calls right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features daily Mass, prayers, articles, and meditations in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church. On the web at magnificat.com.
This is Conversations with Consequences, where we delve deeper into issues affecting our church, our country, and our core, the family.
As Catholics, we need to be informed, aware, and able to talk through some of the tough topics that we're facing in our culture and in our world. Conversations with Consequences gives us the tools to do so.
It's not enough to pray. We have to be a light for the world.
Conversations with Consequences, this Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Scott Wieman is our guest. Scott is the founder of Catholic in Recovery, which you can find at... Scott, you just give the web address. You know I always butcher it. Just give the web address.
CatholicInRecovery.com.
How could I butcher that? It's so simple, and I get it wrong virtually every time. CatholicInRecovery.com. That's not that hard. Check them out. Let's go to Christopher in Wichita. I believe that's where Christopher is. Christopher, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Scott Wieman.
I was actually willing to offer some support for Elizabeth, whose daughter is in Wichita, Kansas. Her granddaughter is in Wichita, Kansas. I didn't hear the whole interview, but I am here in Wichita. Maybe there's something I can do.
Scott?
I love that. So this is how recovery works, is that someone, Christopher, having had an experience himself, a rock bottom moment where he was desperate, I'm sure his family members craving something new and maybe even concerned that he may never find it, now has found help, has found a miracle in his life, and is looking to give back, probably because he recognizes that it's also helpful for him to maintain his own recovery and grow spiritually through the process. So this is how recovery works. It's one individual sharing hope with another. It would be prudent for Elizabeth, and Elizabeth, if you're still listening, strongly encourage you to find some help, either in a virtual setting or in an in-person setting. And
if Christopher wants to check in with it was Elizabeth's granddaughter.
She can find help.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. I think we lost contact with you. I thought you were done, Scott. But so if how would should I have Elizabeth call back and we'll give her Scott's number? Is that, or how should we do this? Chris's number in Wichita. How should we connect you, Chris?
Chris, what do you think?
However you'd like to do it. I just wanted to offer up some help for her, maybe get a woman from another anonymous group or whatever. Send her a book or the Scott Weeman book. I've got that we could give to her. Just some type of way to hopefully open the door, as long as she's willing. That's the one thing. She's got to be willing. If she's willing, then this will work. But I am a virtual attendee, and that's why I'm reaching out. And a regular anonymous group.
I feel like we're so privileged right now to see how recovery works. And here's Christopher in Wichita, Kansas, associated with Catholic in Recovery, saying that he'd be happy to help Elizabeth's daughter, who's in jail in Wichita, and needs some encouragement to get into recovery. If we can hang on, Christopher, we're going to get your information and we'll get it to Elizabeth if she'll call us back, because we don't have Elizabeth's number, do we? So we got Elizabeth. If you're listening, just give us a call. We're holding 2 lines open for you. I don't know why we're holding 2. Go ahead.
I'll also note this. She can also email me at scott@catholicinrecovery.com, and I will be sure to connect to make those connections as well. We're likely going to be starting a Catholic in Recovery group in Wichita over the next couple of months, and we will also have a retreat at the Catholic in Recovery retreat at the Spiritual Life Center in Wichita, October 13th through 15th. And so there are some great things happening locally for her to get connected with. But as Christopher noted, the one thing that I can't do, or Christopher can't do, or you can't do, is instill that willingness. If the person is not willing to find help, then help is almost impossible. And this is one of the beautiful things about recovery, is the respect of one's free will. God respects our free will, and that he can do anything. But in most cases, intervention comes with our willingness to allow him to. And so that willingness piece oftentimes is sparked not by being on a winning streak, but rather hitting a place of rock bottom.
Christopher, if you'd be kind enough just to stay on the line for a minute, Edgar will get to you, and we'll get the information to get it to Elizabeth if she calls back. Elizabeth, the number is 888-318-7884. And God bless you in your work and in your own recovery, Christopher. We're very, very grateful for the call. I want to read a question that an anonymous caller gave, anxious about being on the air with you, but I'll read the question as I have it, and you address it as you can. Okay, Scott? Mm-hmm. Anonymous caller asked this: I have OCD with scrupulosity to a great degree. How much effort should I be putting into overcoming it instead of giving in?
This is a very good question. And there are many layers of our spirituality that can either get in the way of surrender to God, scrupulosity being one of those. So if we look, and this is something actually that is related to the second step of recovery. Step 1 is we admitted we were powerless over fill in the blank: alcohol, drugs, food, lust, gambling, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. And that implies insanity. It also came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. This also implies that there might be some barriers to faith that we might look at in this. That requires really a look at what does our relationship with God look like. There are many barriers that can create our challenges in allowing God to restore us to sanity. That might be indifference towards God. We might just be indifference, and that's almost one of the most challenging to overcome, is a sense of indifference. We might have our own personal defiance, which is not unique for those people who are in recovery, but also scrupulosity, which is really a matter of propelled by our own actions, by a seeming need to be perfect in order to be accepted by God. And so scrupulosity, which might challenge someone or make it very hard, really instill a lot of shame Shame can be activated quite a bit by scrupulosity. If I do one thing wrong, then God, I'll be damned, or God will look at me in a way that's not accepting, and the consequences of that are eternal. That can be overwhelming and keep someone from really taking the next step of action. This is not a program of knowledge. In fact, sometimes the more we know, the more challenging it can be to find recovery, but it's a program of action. Usually we know what is right or wrong, so it's not a question of knowing the right thing to do, but it's a behavioral problem. And it's a behavioral problem because addiction takes root, as I mentioned, in many ways, physically or biologically, cognitively or mentally, emotionally and spiritually. And so we have, there are many, addiction has a great grip on us. Can also lead to scrupulosity, so that we it makes it very challenging to surrender ourselves to God. That third step came after we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. As Catholics, we understand God Trinity way, a Trinitarian way, is God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But if we are still relying on our own sense of perfection in order for God to work miracles in our lives, then we need to look at that before we take action, or while we take action.
Anonymous, thank you so much. I will also suggest to you that you check out CatholicInRecovery.com, which I now know that website, and I'm going to get it right from now on, Catholic in Recovery. I've done every wrong way on that. You can't believe my disappointment when I've looked in your face sometimes, Scott, and I'm like, that's right? And you're like, nope, that's not our web address. And I'm like, come on, man. All right, I'm going to keep going. Let's see who we got. Well, let's go to Mary in Toledo, Ohio, listening on Annunciation Radio. Mary, awful glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Scott Wieman.
Thank you. Scott, do you have any programs for the gender transitioning young adult who is cutting herself, who is making multiple attempts at committing suicide, who doesn't want to hear any religious platitudes? She had a bone marrow transplant. She says that she's male because she's got male DNA from her male donor, and she is stuck in this cycle and is getting a extreme positive reinforcement for those who want her to continue with this, even though she could possibly kill herself.
Scott,
and we're trying to find a recovery group. And I thought this might possibly be a possibility if you have something like that up and running.
Okay, Mary, hang on.
Yeah, so thank you, Mary, for your call. And it sounds like you've got a great concern for this individual. I would say that we have groups available for anyone. The effectiveness of those groups is going to be largely based on the willingness of the participants to take action or to follow through. That, of course, doesn't need to happen immediately. That willingness can come, and a lot of times there can be a sense of, for example, my own recovery started not because I wanted what's best for myself. I really just wanted to win back some of the things that I had lost. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Oh, I think my camera went out. That probably messed you up a little bit. Yeah. But it's best for everyone when my camera goes out, Scott.
All good. So the intentions with which we start our recovery do not have to be perfect, but something within a recovery group can pull us out of what we're currently in the midst of. That might be insanity on a lot of different levels. You described a bit of that yourself, Mary, and I would also suggest that one thing that you won't find a lot of within the Catholic in Recovery Fellowship would be religious platitudes. You're going to get people who can share, who can understand and empathize, but also who are going to just speak truth and not sugarcoat things, and not let you know that this is going to be one of the most challenging battles that you'll ever overcome. And not everyone finds freedom. But if you're willing to take action and willing to put in half of the effort in your recovery with which you put into seeking addiction, that you'll find help. I do wonder, though, Mary, is addiction part of her story? You mentioned some mental health challenges and some gender ideology things. But is she compensating with some kind of substance or behavior that might be addictive or compulsive?
Yeah, I haven't heard. Well, one thing I want to say, I think it's kratom, maybe.
Kratom.
It's you know
synthetic
what I'm talking about?
marijuana.
Oh, is that?
Oh,
yeah.
Marijuana.
And it's popular. It's totally free and available where she's going to school. You know, everybody's taking it. You know, that kind of thing. Plus, she has the ritual of cutting herself and saying she's. You know, it sounds totally bizarre to me. How do you say you're going to be happy with hair and a deep voice when you're attempting to commit suicide?
Mary, I'm going to let Scott respond on the other side because we have to take this break. If you'll hold on, we'll get you an answer right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Want to get right to the core of Christ's saving message? Want a roadmap for living the life Christ calls you to? It's time to look again at the Beatitudes. In his new book, Heart of the Gospel, How the Beatitudes Show Us God's Plan for Happiness, Father Sebastian Walsh demonstrates compellingly how these 8 declarations make up the foundation, the essence, and the final goal of Jesus' teaching. Heart of the Gospel illuminates the scriptural passages from which we get the Beatitudes, explains the significance of their wording, their order, and their timing in Jesus' ministry. And it draws out edifying parallels and connections with salvation history and the lives of the saints. Most importantly, Father Walsh offers wise counsel from his own work as a priest and teacher to help you live the Beatitudes in your own life. Order your copy of Heart of the Gospel today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Anna Mitchell here. Tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll talk about the life and witness of St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher and kick off Religious Freedom Week on their feast day. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Mary is on the line with Scott Wieman, our guest. Scott is the founder of Catholic in Recovery. You can find him at CatholicInRecovery.com. They've got we haven't even mentioned the Catholic in Recovery workbook. So when after we talk with Mary, we'll talk about the Catholic in Recovery workbook a little bit. But Mary has a young person in her life who is struggling with the transgender stuff, finding a great deal of support there. Cutting herself using what you called synthetic marijuana. And you were about to kind of respond to Mary before we had to go to the break.
Yep. So I think that it's really important to understand the situation that this young woman is in and be very clear. And so what should lead our minds in this is that this is a sick person. This person is not well. And clearly, if there are suicide attempts, if she's cutting, if she is resorting to alcohol, drugs, bad behaviors, unhealthy behaviors in order to cope, and certainly there's a lot of dysphoria around gender. So I think that most important is to not see her as she's doing something wrong. Why can't she just change? Will she ever understand or get it? But rather, this is a sick person. And so I would try to treat in both in the sense of your own attitude and the way that you would communicate with them as if they're very sick, spiritually sick, of course, also physically sick and emotionally sick. So lead with that. I would also recognize that she's seeking affirmation. A lot of times we do surround ourselves with people who are going to affirm behaviors that are not so healthy for us. That oftentimes is a means for the other person to justify their own bad behavior. If we have a group consensus that this is okay, we can continue to justify it, despite the fact that other things are happening, cutting, suicide attempts, and things of this nature. I think that what this woman needs is really just an interaction, an empathetic and a loving interaction with someone who has found freedom, someone who has been in a place of some gender dysphoria and or has resorted to cutting or suicidal attempts, suicidal ideation. And that can certainly be found in the Catholic in Recovery group. We do have a meeting that gathers weekly. It's a virtual meeting. I should be able to tell you the date and the time, but I can't off the top of my head. But it's a dual disorders group that meets virtually during the day. And those are for individuals who struggle with an addiction, but also have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And how do we, and the group looks at really, how do we provide solution to both of them, or does one need to be addressed before the other? These are oftentimes questions that people have when they're challenged both by addiction problems and mental health. The addiction is oftentimes a means to cope with the mental health challenge, really self-medicate, or the mental health challenge can be a result of continued addictive behaviors. So,
Mary, check out
I would strongly encourage Mary to find others who have been in this situation, who might know how to, because Mary needs to take some action herself. It's not just wait around and hope that this person comes to her senses, but I would strongly encourage finding a group, Al-Anon or a Catholic in Recovery family and friends group, where you can find others who have been in your situation and circumstances, because you're just as powerless over the situation as she is.
Mary, thank you so much for the call. I know many people are praying for that young woman and for you right now, so you can be assured of that support. And if you want to check it out, CatholicInRecovery.com. Just tell me about the workbook. Bernadette in Colorado, I'm coming to you next. I don't want you to think I've forgotten about you, but tell me about the workbook.
Yeah, I was actually going to make reference to the Catholic in Recovery workbook when the gentleman or the person had called regarding scrupulosity. So when in the workbook, which is 20 sections, works through the 12 steps while integrating Catholic spirituality. In the second step, we do take a look at what are these barriers to faith and real barriers to a true surrender to God, looking at things like defiance or indifference, scrupulosity. And so these are really, the steps are listed in order for a reason. We admit that we're powerless at first, in the first step, and kind of move our way out, but they're to be done in order, not by ourselves, but with a group of people. And so you can find the Catholic in Recovery workbook at CatholicInRecovery.com, AveMariaPress.com, Amazon, other places. We also have a digital platform that's a companion to the workbook, where we call it CIR Plus. There's a free version and a premium version. The premium version offers that workbook companion. So for each of the 20 sections, we have video testimonials from individuals who have kind of shared experience around that part of the 12 steps, and can be very helpful to build a sense of community while working through the 12 steps. We'll also be offering 12-step workbook groups beginning in August, and so we'll be really leading individuals through the 12 steps with the Catholic in Recovery workbook, and we'll be beginning those 12-step workbook groups every month. And so new cohorts starting on a monthly basis. This is something that we'll be communicating more on CatholicInRecovery.com.
Now we'll go to Bernadette. Bernadette, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Scott.
Thank you so much, Scott and Cy. I appreciate it. I'm calling about a brother of mine who has, I believe, an addiction to stuff. He has a storage unit that's half full of hobby type of items, and he's really so overwhelmed he can't even deal with it. But it's costing him a lot of money to just pay for that storage each month. And he's in a job that it doesn't help that he gets like discounts to purchase these kinds of items. And I think it could be also a factor of our parents. My dad grew up in the tail end of the Depression, and so, they were not prone to throwing much of anything away. And now both my parents have passed away, and I'm in charge of going through their stuff. So I I think there's also some overeating involved, and I think, I think he's also angry with God. So I don't know where to kind of help direct him, and I'm not sure he's willing yet. That's the other big piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. That's an important piece of the puzzle, and grateful that you recognized it, and really grateful for your call. And so a couple of things have been really revealing to me. Some of the most, some of the biggest revelations I've had since starting Catholic in Recovery, and really seeing this community grow, is that first and foremost, I would say, is that the number of people who seek recovery from food-related addictions is nearly as much as people who are seeking recovery from alcohol and drug-related addictions. And the next is how much, how prevalent cluttering or hoarding or the obsessive collection of stuff is prevalent in our society today. And also, those two things are oftentimes linked. We oftentimes see different addictions and compulsive behaviors that are linked together. And those two, hoarding or cluttering, however you want to label it, and overeating, are oftentimes very much linked. I believe that it has to do with this sense of scarcity. We have this inherent belief that there's never going to be enough, and we operate from this place of scarcity. And so we need to collect and gather and protect. That is true of someone like myself, who is a recovering alcoholic or even active in addiction, certainly more prevalent, in active addiction, where one drink was too much, but 1,000 was never enough. It's just this, it's not some people in recovery fellowships will describe it, whether it's alcohol, drugs, food, as a disease of more. We are never satisfied, and there's never enough. And so there's very little space for God in any of that. Now, it can be very challenging to begin kind of get that willingness or harness some of that willingness. A lot of times, unfortunately, that willingness comes from a place of pain, or as we would describe, rock bottom. But other things can happen. I mean, there is also, some people might be thinking to themselves, like, do I need to intervene on my loved one? Is it in the best interest of them if I say something about this? How might I go about doing that? If that is a question, then there are options available for professional help to intervene and care for your loved one. I was even just thinking about this earlier the other day, like, how responsible are we for our brother or our sister, our brother's keeper or our sister's keeper? What is our responsibility, and how challenging it is to see someone that we love go through something so unfulfilling or so empty. But what place do we have? That certainly will rest. The answer to that will rest in your relationship with that person. Do you have a relationship where you can speak truth to them and they can receive it in some kind of way? Oftentimes, getting the whole family on the same page can create some sense of, we're not just attacking you, but we want to see your wellness. We want to see you well, and we're willing to take actions ourselves in order to do that as well. That's kind of what begins to come to my mind when related to this, but I would certainly classify that hoarding, that collection of stuff, that never being satisfied with enough, as certainly an addiction, compulsion, or unhealthy attachment. I would suggest, if there is willingness, or if other callers are dealing with the same thing themselves, or a loved one is dealing with the same thing and there's some willingness there, we have a virtual meeting on Sunday nights, CatholicInRecovery.com. You can find the meeting information, but it's a behavior and process addiction recovery group. And so this kind of like process addiction, which is, collection of things. It might not be as tangible as taking a drug or taking a drink or something along those lines, but it's a process, much like the rewards, short-lived, but similar to the rewards of someone who takes the first drink or who snorts cocaine or something along those lines. And unfortunately, the effects can be detrimental as well, not only physically, emotionally, spiritually, and cognitively. So not Mary, but Elizabeth, it sounds like Bernadette. Sorry, Bernadette. Thank you for your call. And does any of that make sense to you?
It does. Thank you. Sounds like the key is, I'm not sure he's willing to be helped. And it's affecting me directly because he's currently living with me, because this storage unit is basically his rent and he can't live there. So this is having an effect on you as well. Exactly. And my
It
children
sounds like you might be in a
affected by. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you might be in a position where you can speak some of this to him. You know, a lot of times speaking how another person's behavior affects us, and if we can do this from a place of emotional balance, where we're not getting really emotionally charged, but can do it in a way that is level, and just as kind of a sharing of the truth, that can be very grounding. And it can also propel, you may not get an immediate reaction that you're looking for, but over time it might plant this idea of a need for change within him, which might spark some willingness. And your willingness to, you can't do it for him, but to be there and provide the support that he needs along the way can be helpful. And sometimes that might even just be going with him to his storage unit and just, we're going to take some action today and we're going to get through this. But, the cleaning out of the stuff is not a solution if really what's at the foundation of it, which is sounds like a fear of scarcity and other things are not really solved.
Bernadette, I'm going to leave it there because we do have to take a break. I'll take the break. We'll be right back with more calls for Scott Weeman. We're talking about the Catholic faith, addiction, recovery. Scott is the founder of Catholic in Recovery. We'll be right back with more right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN Global Catholic Network is the largest religious media network in the world. 11 global TV channels, English and Spanish radio networks with over 500 AM and FM radio affiliates, one of the largest Catholic websites in the world, dozens of podcasts every week, social media, electronic and print news services, and EWTN Publishing. EWTN is the Global Catholic Network. For more about EWTN, visit EWTN.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. CatholicInRecovery.com is where you can go if you want to know more about this. CatholicInRecovery.com. Scott Weeman, the founder of Catholic in Recovery. And Scott's usually in studio here with us. As a matter of fact, I just saw Chris Check walk in the studio and he exclaimed. I couldn't hear him because he's on the other side, but he was like, why isn't he here? I think that's the way I interpreted his exclamation. So why aren't you here, Scott? What's the matter with us that you won't come in the studio with it? What are you up to?
Well, we've been taking too long to get a Catholic in Recovery podcast started with Catholic Answers.
Oh, so you're afraid to face us?
Network. So yeah. No, it truly pains me to not be in studio today. I love the energy that we have in taking calls, and there's a few things that I get to do that are more rewarding and I think valuable than taking live calls. So,
yeah.
But right now, I am in the midst of a 75-day road trip around the country that my family, my wife and 3 kids are part of. And I'm currently in Nashville, Tennessee. I visited Catholic in Recovery groups in Phoenix, Arizona, Clovis, New Mexico, San Antonio, Dallas, the Woodlands, Lafayette, Louisiana, Slidell, New Orleans, or just outside of New Orleans, Tuscaloosa, various groups around the country. We had a Catholic in Recovery retreat at the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Hanceville, Alabama, just north of Birmingham. And I'm getting to connect and participate in all these Catholic in Recovery groups, which are taking place. And it's been an incredible experience to just see and meet the people who are finding our groups. Some of them have been in recovery for a long time and are seeking an infusion of their faith in the recovery, and others are just getting their recovery started. Some of them are family members impacted by a loved one's addiction, and they're finding other family members who are showing them some important principles of family recovery and getting really employing a new way of life. And others are people who are seeking recovery from an addiction, compulsion, or unhealthy attachment, maybe for the first time, or maybe they're trying again. And it's been really wonderful to see how the community is growing around the country and around the world. And it's been incredibly rewarding. And I look forward to doing more. We're going to have a meeting in Notre Dame University and looking to do some collaboration with the McGrath Institute of Church Life in Notre Dame and their FIAT program, which combines mental health and faith-related activities and a variety of other things. There are many of opportunities that exist. We seek to support priests and seminarians, both in their own recovery needs, but also in providing pastoral care for their communities. all sorts of different things taking place. But yeah, it's been a wonderful road trip. The next time I'm on live, I'll be in studio.
Okay, good. All right, very, very, very good. It's wonderful, just so wonderful to hear about all that's going on, Scott. It's just wonderful to think of all the healing that will come from that. When you visit the various Catholic and recovery groups, the person who started it, did they start it because they went online and there's like on the website, is there something where it goes, hey, if you want to start a group in your parish, is there that kind of thing?
That's right. Yeah. Every group in the United States has started. I gotta say this, partly they might hear me on Catholic Answers Live and then submit a form on our website. Go to CatholicinRecovery.com. We have a meetings tab. You can find an in-person meeting or a virtual meeting within that menu option, but you can also click a link to start a new group, and that just provides a form where you can fill out that we receive, contact you, and work with you to get a Catholic and recovery group started in your community. Really, what we look for in someone who's getting a group started is someone who has personal recovery experience. So you have to be able to relate to the experience of those people who are coming. It's, recovery doesn't work just by someone getting up in the class and teaching a curriculum, but it's really just everyone being on a level playing field, sharing experience, strength, and hope, and seeking recovery one day at a time. And so recovery experience is vital. Certainly being a faithful Catholic, active in a church life is very important as well. But we have plenty of resources to provide help and support along the way. And if anyone is listening right now that wants to get a Catholic and recovery group started, or just learn more about the process, go to CatholicInRecovery.com, check out our meetings menu option, and click on Start a New Group. Fill out that form, and we'll be happy to help you.
I didn't actually hear anything you said after Catholic Answers Live is helpful in this. So I've just been sitting here thinking about that. But I'm sure everything you said was great, but that was I shut down after that. CatholicInRecovery.com. Do visit. Find out how you can be involved. Let's go to Jim in Portland, Oregon, listening on KBVM. We're so glad you're here, Jim. Go ahead with your question for Scott Weeman.
Okay. I was wondering, in your program, does God kind of come across, you get the feel that there's a sense of a kindly, friendly sense of humor? Because I think that would be a very good sign. I also wanted to add, I don't think God likes to play God, but people do.
I'm going to be stealing that last thing. I'm going to steal that last one and act like I thought of it. It's very good, Jim. But so what kind of God is the God of Catholic in Recovery?
It's a good question. So I recall, the first meeting, October 10th, 2011. I woke up that morning and I did something different. I got to an early morning recovery group, and that saved my life. Now, when I got there, it was early in the morning. I was used to sleeping through hangovers at this time. It was in the second floor of an Episcopal church in Pacific Beach, San Diego. And I got to the stairwell, and I could hear laughter and camaraderie coming from above. And I thought to myself, if these people have any idea what I'm going through, there's no reason that they should be laughing. I got to be in the wrong place. And, but lo and behold, I went up, made my way up to the room, sat in the back corner, and tried not to be noticed. I was noticed, and someone came up to me, looked me in the eye, said, I know exactly how you feel. You don't ever have to drink again. But there was something about the laughter and the camaraderie that was very freeing. I think that laughter is a sign of freedom and an expression. Even in, so there is one of the expressions that you'll hear sometimes in recovery groups is they'll refer to Rule 62. Do you know Rule 62, Si?
Not a clue.
No, you don't.
No.
It's Rule 62, don't take yourself so seriously. Now, take your recovery very seriously, but sometimes we just take ourselves too seriously. And we should take our faith very seriously. We should take our recovery very seriously. But sometimes we can be a little bit light on ourselves and not always take ourselves so seriously. So I appreciate what Jim mentioned about, having some lightness in recovery, or that laughter being a sign of healing. I think great healing. We can laugh about the things that if just an onlooker and an outside observer were in a room or in a recovery meeting, you guys are laughing about this stuff. But there's just this collective freedom. It's almost like being like revived from a shipwreck or something like that, where there's this long-term camaraderie that exists among the people who have found freedom, who have been saved, and now get to one day at a time love, know, and serve God with all their heart, mind, and soul. And there is a beauty to that. I mean, challenges exist in my day every day, but my worst days today are not even close to as bad as my best days when I was active in my addiction, just chained to alcohol, drugs, lust, you name it. I was just seeking all these things in place of God, and I was playing God myself. And boy, so grateful that God intervened somehow.
Jim, thank you. Thank you very, very much for that question, and I very much appreciate the call. Scott Weeman is our guest. I keep saying the website because I'm so proud that I finally am getting it right, CatholicInRecovery.com. CatholicInRecovery.com. I want to just ask you about something. You talk about the community side of it, and I'm thinking about Mary's call about the young person who's struggling so much with cutting and the transgender stuff and all of that. And I feel like maybe young people aren't getting enough community, and I wonder if that's part of the, that what leads us down the path of addiction. And that's part of why it's the cure, why community is the cure, is that we're so desperate for community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some would argue that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but rather is connection, and that implies that it's in isolation that we really find addiction. And like many others, closet user, drinker, whatever. We cannot find the solution in isolation. That has to be done in community. The community of saints, the communion of saints, our collective experience and relationship with God, and also our relationship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. We need each other, and He empowers us in many ways, just like Jesus empowers His apostles to go spread the good news and share it to all corners of the globe. He asks us to do the same thing. And so this is very much where the 12th step, where we're called to share a message of hope with others, collides with the sacrament of confirmation, where we are to go make disciples of all nations. We have a special experience, strength, and hope to share with individuals who are in a place of still suffering. And so, as the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous mentions on page 125, what was once our worst, the darkest part of our lives becomes one of the greatest assets to help other individuals and families, but also to keep us attached to God one day at a time. I think recovery is such a great gift, and I invite everyone to find it in some way themselves.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you have the chance to make that appeal before we end, because we're absolutely ravaged by addiction. Our society, our culture, absolutely ravaged by addiction. It's in every home. It does strike me that because of my own kids, our young adults, I feel sensitive to the fact that it seems like people are very young. I meet very young people, 19, 20, up to 25 or so, who have been to rehab, who are in recovery. And part of me is hopeful about that, because I think a generation ago, they might have gone on 20 more years before they got to that. But also they're so young, to have had to face that.
Yeah, I mean, it's oftentimes generational. It's a generational disease. It's a generational spiritual disease, and we pass along what we know. And so, many people are not even ever exposed to a life outside of this, a life of addiction. And they receive messages throughout their whole life that in order to just find a way to cope, or seek so we become attached to these things that we make idols, because they're doing for us what only God can really do, and that's providing a sense of peace, a sense of hope, and whether it be alcohol, drugs, food, lust, gambling, technology, cluttering, or hoarding. These are all just false impersonifications of God. And there is a God there. He's inviting us to relationship with Him, and I invite everyone to seek it.
Praise God. Scott Weeman, we're so blessed to have you as a friend, personally, and as a friend of this apostolate. God bless you and all your work at Catholic in Recovery.
Thank you. Thank you, Ty.
CatholicInRecovery.com. I'm not going to stop saying it because I'm saying it right this time. CatholicInRecovery.com. We'll see you tomorrow for 2 hours of open forum, God willing, right here. Catholic Answers Live.